1, 2, 3. Okay, Abdullah, you just close the door for me. Just make sure that we are okay on the microphone. So we're just checking that we are okay, inshallah ta'ala, on the microphone. I hope so. Maybe one of the people watching can just drop us a little comment to let us know if you can hear me okay. Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Let's have a look. Settings, right. Okay. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen wassalatu wassalam ala abdillahi wa rasulih nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. As always, we begin by praising Allah Azza wa Jal, by asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to exalt the mention and grant peace to our messenger Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam and to his family and his companions. So I made an effort today to try to go through the old questions that maybe I didn't respond to as I would have wished to, or I maybe skipped a few that I didn't respond, and also to try and get up to date with as many of the new questions as possible. So just to remind everyone, these questions are all being submitted via a Google form, which is available on the Newcastle Central Masjid Facebook page. And then every week on a Sunday at 7 o'clock UK time, we answer those questions, inshaAllah ta'ala. So inshaAllah ta'ala, as I said, I tried to go through back some of the questions that maybe I had missed out. So the first one that I have on my list that I had missed out was a question regarding AdSense. So this was a question regarding Google AdSense on a website or YouTube channel, and you're able to filter out certain adverts. For example, you can make sure that you don't have adverts with alcohol or gambling, but you might have adverts that contain music, or for example, they might contain people that are not covered properly and so on. So the ruling for this, I did double check and make sure the ruling for this comes under the ayah in which Allah Azza wa Jalla said, وَتَعَاوَنُوا عَلَى الْبِرِّ وَالتَّقْوَى وَلَا تَعَاوَنُوا عَلَى الْإِثْمِ وَالْعُدْوَانِ. Cooperate in everything which is good, cooperate in doing good, and cooperate in keeping away from the haram, but don't cooperate in sin and transgression. So it's not allowed for a person to host adverts that contain, for example, a woman who is not covered properly, or for example, music, or they contain things like that. And what a person must do is they must filter these out. If they're not able to filter them out, and they're not able to replace the adverts with text-based adverts and so on, then they have to avoid using those kind of programs. Now, there are alternatives they can do. At the end of the day, if they're able to, and the occasional thing that happens is not that much of a, subhanAllah, someone might not realize, and occasionally they had a filter set, but something crept in. We hope that, inshallah, this person, they can be forgiven for this, inshallah. But the issue of someone who knows that they're going to get frequent adverts that have haram in them, they have to abstain from those programs. The next question that I didn't answer, as far as I can remember, was relating to backbiting non-Muslims, especially non-Muslim leaders of countries. If they are oppressing the Muslims, can we make dua for their destruction, etc.? So first of all, it is not right for a Muslim to make ghiba of anyone. Ghiba of a Muslim, it falls under the topic of ghiba. it actually falls and counts as backbiting. But as for ghiba of the non-Muslim, then it falls under that which is haram for other reasons. There are a number of reasons for that. The scholars mention. They mention that it could drive them away from Islam. They mention that it is a kind of a harm, that if they, for example, they're living in a Muslim country and people make ghiba of them, they backbite them, then that person might feel insecure, or they might come to a harm which is prohibited. So they mention many other reasons, which, because it's harming people. And the Prophet ﷺ, he said that the Muslim is not ta'an and la'an. The Muslim is not someone who is always cursing people, or always criticizing or having a go at people, nor is the Muslim someone who it comes from them evil words and sort of bad language. Hadith is narrated by Tirmidhi, rahimahullah ta'ala. So there is no way that you can justify backbiting a non-Muslim, but it doesn't fall under the category of ghiba in a pure sense. It falls under other categories of the haram, like, for example, saying, being from the people who have evil speech, or being from the people who harm people and push them away from Islam, or being from the people who harm the non-Muslims who are living in the Muslim lands, and so on. As for if that person is fighting against the Muslims, and they're attacking the Muslims and fighting against the Muslims, then again, in general, there might be some cases where the scholars allowed it, like the poet who insults the enemy to make them scared, like Hijr, the poetry when they used to insult the enemy and things like that. Like, all of these are halat khasa, they're specific situations. As for generally talking, making backbiting the non-Muslims, then I don't think this is permissible for other reasons than the reason of ghiba, and Allah Azza wa Jalla knows best. And as for making dua against people, and I think this is more of a complicated question. There is no doubt about the permissibility of making dua for or making dua against the one who is causing great trouble and hate and great evil for the Muslims and harming the Muslims. But in reality also, there's a lot of people don't know the rulings properly, and a lot of people will go to excesses and make dua against people that maybe they should be making dua for Allah to guide them. And I'm talking about individuals, and they might take this as a permission to make dua against people generally. So we think that a person should be cautious and careful about this, not go too far in it, and a person should try to use their dua for what is beneficial, like making dua for the Muslims and making dua for themselves and their families, and making dua for the mustada'afin from the Muslims, those who are oppressed from the Muslims, and asking Allah Azza wa Jal to bring them relief. And then if they want to make dua against the enemies that are causing this problem, let them make it general without naming people specifically. Let them make it general, like saying, "Oh Allah, whoever wants man aradana wa dinana bisu'in wa shar, whoever wants bad for us and our religion, then make فَجَعَلْ سُوءَهُ وَشَرَّهُ فِي نَفْسِهِ, make the evil of them come back against them. وَجَعَلْ كَيْدَهُ فِي نَحْرِهِ, and ruin the plot that they make their plots come back against them. وَخُذْهُ أَخْذَ عَزِيزٍ مُقْتَدِرٍ, and seize them with the seizing of the one who is Al-Aziz Al-Muqtadir. So this general dua, by saying, "Oh Allah, whoever wants evil for the Muslims," or "Oh Allah, whoever has planned and plotted against the Muslims, make the plots come against them." There is no harm in this at all. But naming people specifically, I would leave that for the people of knowledge, because this is an area where a lot of people could fall into errors, and they might go beyond the limits that are set by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The next question that we didn't go into from the previous questions was relating to a restaurant that does things that are not befitting of the Muslim. Maybe they play music, maybe they have put up a Christmas tree in the window at Christmas time and so on. So what is the ruling about this? So the best that I could find on this is that the food itself is not haram, but it's not befitting to eat there. It's better that you avoid it, and it's not right for you to go and eat in those places. But however, if someone ate from it, the food is not haram. So we say that it's not befitting for a person. It's not, we don't want somebody to be, there's a Muslim who's doing bad things, doing some kinds of haram, and they have a restaurant, or a non-Muslim who is also doing the same, and they have a restaurant, and then we go in there and just sitting there as though there's nothing wrong. We should go there, speak to them, advise them, and so on. But if you eat from there, the food is not haram. That's the best that I could find on that topic. And that's an important point, because sometimes you do end up eating in those places. And sometimes, for example, someone invites you for food and you end up eating in a place. It's not, necessarily what you would, what would be ideal. So it's important to know that the food is not haram there. The food doesn't become haram. However, if a person, either avoids it, or if when they go, they speak to the owner and give them advice, give them nasiha. And subhanAllah, this is easier than people think. Many times you go into a restaurant and we ask the owner, can you switch off the music, please? And most of the time, they are willing to accommodate your request. Very rarely they will say no. Sometimes they might say no. We say, okay, could you at least turn it down to the lowest level? Because hearing is not the same as listening. Like the fact that I can hear some noise isn't the same as me listening to it and giving it my attention. However, usually they accept these requests. And if they don't, be prepared to say, okay, then in that case, I think I'd rather go somewhere else. And if enough people do that, they will change. They will decide to make changes, inshallah. But with softness, and let the person speak to the owner with softness and gentleness. And inshallah, the food is not prohibited. So the next question that we had, someone who talked about a pain in their heart when they are trying to get back on track after doing sins, or when they're telling people to follow the way of the early generations, and they're feeling like a pain when they do this. And they asked about Surah Al Hijr, in which Allah Azza wa Jalla said, وَلَقَدْ نَعْلَمُ أَنَّهُ يَضِيقُ صَدْرُكَ مِمَّا يَقُولُونَ فَسَبِّحْ بِحَمْدِ رَبِّكَ وَكُن مِّنَ السَّاجِدِينَ وَاعْبُدْ رَبَّكَ حَتَّى يَأْتِيكَ الْيَقِينُ. They said, does it fall under this ayah, or these three ayat, that we certainly know that your chest, you feel a compression in your chest because of what they say. So say Subhanallah and praise your Lord, and be from those who prostrate and worship your Lord until certainty comes to you, until death comes to you. I think that if a person feels that there are two different situations here. One is that a person feels really sad and really just feels horrible when they're talking to people about that, and they just don't feel good. Then I think this could fall under the ayah in Surah Al Hijr. Someone just doesn't feel good. Like, subhanAllah, I just feel, subhanAllah, when I tell people and then I feel like they don't accept it from me and I don't feel good. Either it's possible to say. And this is not necessarily something that a person needs to worry about, and maybe more something that a person just needs to, just have more confidence in what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has promised. Read the seerah of the prophets, alayhimus salatu wassalam, and inshallah ta'ala you feel better. But if someone is actually feeling pain, physical pain, then this appears to me to be closer to a matter relating to the jinn and the shaitan, and that the shaitan is causing them this pain. And I would advise the person to consider ruqya shar'iyya, Islamic ruqya, if they are actually getting physical pain. Like, for example, someone says, when I try to tell someone to do good, I start to choke. Or when I start to tell people to do good, I feel like my fingers are on fire, or I feel a pain in my heart as though someone has stabbed me in the heart. Then this appears to me to be from the shaitan, and it requires ruqya shar'iyya. That's what it appears to me. But if someone just feels really bad, and just feels down about it, then this is inshallah maybe you can apply the ayat in Surah Al Hijr as the questioner mentioned, and increase in your praise of Allah, increase in saying subhanallah, increase in your worship of Allah, increase in your sajda, complain of your difficulties to Allah. There's a difference between the feeling which, when someone says like, I'm so upset, it's painful how upset I feel. That's possible to cure with turning to Allah and sajda and so on. But if a person is physically getting physical symptoms when they do some good deeds, then this appears to me that this is from the shaitan, and it requires ruqya shar'iyah, and Allah Azza wa Jal knows best. Okay, my next question, and we're getting back towards the questions that we have to do for today. There was a question: can a wife correct her husband in the recitation during the salah? You can get this question has been answered extensively on the AMAU Al-Madrasatul Umariyah YouTube channel. So all you need to do, you've got a couple of choices. You can just go over to AMAU at home, AMAUATHOME, AMAU at home.com, and you can register there, or you can go directly to YouTube and you can type in Al-Madrasa Al-Umariyah, and you'll find in there that there is a video recently posted in the last few days entitled Can a Wife Correct Her Husband in the Recitation During the Salah by Sheikh Abdul Rahman Hassan, and inshallah he answered that question extensively. The next question: what is the ruling on men and women shaving the middle part between the eyebrows? So that is the middle part here between the eyebrows. The Lajna Ad-Da'ima in Saudi Arabia, they gave a fatwa that this is permissible, and this hair is not from that which is considered to be from the eyebrow, and it's also not, the scholars differed over the hair which is not mentioned in the Quran and the Sunnah. So for example, the beard is mentioned in the Quran and the Sunnah, in the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. The eyebrows are mentioned. Different things are mentioned. For example, plucking the armpit hair is mentioned. Shaving the hair around the private parts is mentioned. But what about the hair that isn't mentioned anywhere in the Sunnah? What is the ruling on this? So they gave the fatwa and the opinion that the Sharia is easy. There is ease. Like a person can remove hair if that hair is not mentioned in that hair is not mentioned specifically in the Sunnah from the hair that you should not remove. There is no harm in a person removing it. Like there is no harm in a lady that, for example, shaves her legs or something like that. There is no harm in this, because the Sharia didn't explicitly prohibit it, and nor did it encourage it. It stayed silent. And the basic issue is that matters like that, which the Sharia stayed silent about, then there is no harm in a person doing that, inshallah. However, with regard to the men, then my advice would be to the men, the only concern I would have is for the men is that you don't do things that resemble women. Like, I don't believe that it's right for a man, for example, to shave his legs, for example, because this resembles the actions of women, and it's become known as something that is specifically for women. Even urfan, even in our time, and as we understand it, even in the terms of, the cultural understanding. But the Prophet ﷺ, he prohibited, and he had strong words of prohibition for the men that resemble women and the women that resemble men. So I don't think a man should be doing any of those treatments that are unique to women, like removing hair that is unique to women. And this is not permissible for a man to do, because it resembles the things that the women do, unless he has a medical reason or a significant reason for doing that, like it's causing him a lot of harm or some irritation, or he has some illness or some sickness and the doctor advises him to do it, then there is no harm in that. Or he needs to remove that hair because of an operation or because of some kind of thing like that. But as for the hair which is in the middle of the eyebrows, there is no harm in men and women removing this, because it doesn't fall under the prohibition, and it's not something that is unique to a woman. The next question. This was a really beautiful question, and I really appreciated the person who asked this question. May Allah bless them. I'm hoping you can clarify the Islamic position on having wealth. On one hand, I see narrations regarding the Prophet ﷺ telling us how little food he had and how poor he was. And in Sahih Muslim, the hadith in which the Prophet ﷺ said, Allahumma ja'al rizqa ali Muhammad qutan. O Allah, make the provision of the family of Muhammad qut, yani just enough. What is enough for them and nothing more. But on the other hand, I see people giving da'wah telling us that Muslims should be wealthy and that Muslims who don't strive to earn money have a wrong mentality. And if we shouldn't have an attachment to this world, should Muslims not contribute to beneficial worldly matters such as advancements in engineering? Some say we should, but how do we talk about not attaching ourselves to this dunya? And I hear contradicting information from students of knowledge about issues like this, and it makes me confused, frustrated, and depressed. And can you provide us with a clarification? So it's a very beautiful question. Generally speaking, when you find contradictions between reliable sources, and by that I mean, I'm not talking about, you have one person who is a reliable teacher on YouTube is saying one thing, and then you have, Fulan ibn Fulan, so-and-so, who, subhanAllah, is just basically doesn't have knowledge and is just talking. That's not the contradiction I'm talking about. I'm talking about a contradiction where you see the scholars saying different things, or you see reliable students of knowledge saying different things, or you see, like in books, you read books that appear to contradict themselves. This is a really important sort of, it's a really important skill to learn how to deal with it. And generally speaking, it's not always the case that the two can be reconciled, but in many cases, your first question, and this is a principle in usul al-fiqh, in the science of that the underlying sciences of fiqh, one of the most fundamental principles is that al-jam'u awla, that joining between contradictory statements and finding a way to reconcile them is more important. It's more important than, and it should be given precedence over leaving one statement and taking one statement. So in other words, if you've got reliable sources, especially ahadith, or you have reliable scholars saying things, usually if you look at this issue and it's the same issue they're talking about, you can often find that there's an understanding which reconciles these different things and brings them together into a single sort of consistent opinion. So that being said here, the first thing I did notice is that on the side of talking about, the questioner mentioned hadith for one side, but on the other hand just said people online giving da'wah. So those two are obviously not the same. However, there are also ahadith that tell us, there are ayat and ahadith, for example, the statement of Allah Azza wa Jalla, وَلَا تَنْسَ نَصِيبَكَ مِنَ الدُّنْيَا, don't forget your portion of the dunya. And likewise, the fact that some of the Sahaba were wealthy, and that the statement of the Prophet ﷺ in which he said, نِعْمَ الْمَالُ الصَّالِحِ لِلْعَبْدِ الصَّالِحِ, أو كما قال صلى الله عليه وسلم, he said that how excellent is good wealth for a good person, and so on. So how, if we have hadith on both sides and we have examples from the Sahaba on both sides, then how do we break this issue down and understand it? So we have to go into the issue in some details here. And we have to look at the different situations regarding wealth and whether it might be different types of wealth, or there might be a more nuanced answer than just saying wealth is bad or wealth is good. So here, what we want to say is, first of all, let's deal with this hadith. Allahumma ja'al rizqa ali Muhammadin quta. O Allah, make the wealth of the family, or the provision of the family of Muhammad, quta. Qut, the word qut here, it means that which is sufficient, and that's all. And this is something that we want to establish first of all, that Islam never ever called for poverty. Never in a single text. And I don't believe there is an authentic hadith, to the best of my knowledge, that I can see that there is an authentic hadith in which a person calls for and makes dua for poverty. And makes dua for poverty. So we can now put that one on one side. We shouldn't be asking Allah to be poor. Here, the Prophet ﷺ is asking for qut. Qut. He's asking for what is enough. And in the famous dua, Allahumma kfina bihalalika an haramik wa aghnina bifadlika amman siwak. O Allah, make the halal enough for us that we don't need to go to the haram, and give us enough that we don't need to ask anyone except you. This is what Islam calls for. This is what Islam calls for. To have enough that you don't need to ask other people, to have enough that what you have is sufficient for your needs. That's what Islam calls for in terms of these dua and these adhkar and things that we say, that we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give us enough that we don't have to have debt, to give us enough that we don't have to ask people, to give us enough that we don't fall into the haram. And this, I think, is mahal ittifaq or shibh ittifaq. It's basically an agreed position. There isn't a great deal of difference among the scholars in this. Allahumma, except you see from the Sufiya, the Sufis and so on, that you see from them that they encourage deliberate poverty, like for a person to deliberately live in poverty, and they praise the people who deliberately live in poverty. And we don't know any evidence for that. We think that this is not from the sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Someone might put forward, what about Abu Bakr when he gave all of his wealth away? And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said to Abu Bakr, what have you left for your family? And he said, أَبْقَيْتُ لَهُمُ اللَّهَ وَرَسُولَهُ. I left for them Allah and His Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. There is no issue in this, but this is not asking Allah for poverty. This is that Abu Bakr saw the Muslims were in desperate need of charity, and he had the strength to be able to give all of his charity for the sake of Allah. And he knew that it wouldn't lead him to haram. He knew he was strong enough to resist the haram, because Allah Azza wa Jal tells you not to give all of your money away in charity. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, وَلَا تَبْسُطْهَا كُلَّ الْبَسْطِ. Don't give all of your money away so that you end up in a situation where you're in poverty. However, the scholars say if a person gives away all of their money and they know they have the ability to do that and the strength to be able to do that, and they know they will not fall into the haram, and they're convinced, they know they have the strength to not to fall into the haram, then this is something which is a rare situation that a person might experience. But generally speaking, people should not give away everything that they have and should not aim for poverty. And as we said, we don't know from Ahl Sunnah, the people upon the Sunnah, we don't know any evidence that we should be calling upon Allah to ask Allah to make us poor, or to ask Allah not to give us any wealth. That's one side. Now the question comes in, what about what is more than al-qut, more than what you need? Should you be asking Allah Azza wa Jal for more than you need? Asking Allah for what you need, this is, as I said, mahal ittifaq baina, what we can see, there is no real disagreement. Asking Allah to give you enough for what you need. And also that is different from a person who bears poverty with patience. And this is some of the ahadith indicate this. A person said, but isn't there a hadith that talks about the virtue of the people who had that poverty and so on? But the ahadith that talk about the virtue of this, they don't talk about asking for it. They talk about the virtue of patience if it happens to you. A person is patient upon it. A person doesn't fall into the haram and remains patient and steadfast even when they are touched by this. Then there is no issue in that. So now the issue comes in asking Allah for more than is needed. Asking Allah Azza wa Jal for more than is needed. And this is where we find maybe we can say that we don't find an evidence in Islam, and this requires more research, but I don't know of an evidence in Islam where there is an evidence for asking Allah for more than you need. Allahumma, unless you're asking Allah to have that in order to give sadaqah with it. However, let us now take it from another angle. Is it haram to have more than you need? Is it haram if we say being wealthy, if we use the word wealthy and we say the word wealthy means to have more than you need, then we can say that we don't find any dua for this. Like we don't find a person making dua or there being a sunnah for making dua for you to have more money than you need. However, is it haram to have more money than you need? There is no doubt. And I don't think there is any serious disagreement among the scholars that it is permissible for a person to have more money than they need. As long as they give their zakah and they don't waste it, it is permissible for them to have more money than they need, and it is not haram. It's not haram. But is it praiseworthy? Is it praiseworthy? My initial research on this is, if it happens to you, then there is no harm in this. Like if it so happens that your business is doing well and you're making more money than you need, you don't need to put the brakes on and say, okay, I should stop now because I'm getting more money than I need. There is no need for that. But should you be striving and using up your time chasing money that you don't need? This is where I think it is madhmoom, it's blameworthy. The person who is using up a lot of their time and is wasting a lot of their time trying to get money that they don't need. And again, here, when I say need, there is no harm in a person saying, I would like to have a little bit of savings because, if a person loses their job, it could be difficult for them. So I'm not talking about, persons included in need is having a little bit of savings. No problem. Having some savings, even if a person says, I'm working to buy a house, fair enough. But what the issue is when a person is striving and using up their time to get money that they don't need. And maybe they would justify this and say that this is for the sake of the ummah, I'm doing this. But that's a poor justification and a poor reasoning, because ultimately it's not your responsibility in that way. That's not, the way that the person is thinking is the wrong way around. That I'm doing this for the ummah. Really, this can be from the excuse of the shaitan, that the shaitan puts into their mind, that you're wasting your time and you're giving up on and on the things that are important and your ibadat, and you're telling people that I'm doing it for the ummah. I don't really see that being the case. And I think that most people who say that don't actually end up giving all of that money in sadaqah. If a person was actually doing that and all of that money coming, they were giving it in sadaqah, then I would say, sidqan, truthfully, you are contributing to the ummah. But a lot of people, when they talk about being rich, they're still going to have their beautiful house, beautiful car, all the luxuries, and then give a little bit of sadaqah with what's left. That's not true to the person who says, I'm giving up on these things for the ummah. I'm working hard for the ummah. I'm doing this for the ummah. If you're doing it for the ummah, then, give everything that is extra to the ummah. But ultimately, that's not the case, so be honest with yourself and say, I'm doing this for myself because I want to live in a nice house and I want to have a nice car and I hope to be able to give sadaqah. But don't fool yourself into thinking that you're doing a big sacrifice because you live in this huge house and you have beautiful cars and beautiful lifestyle and so on. And then you say, well, this is a hardship that I have to bear upon myself, because I'm sacrificing myself for the ummah, while I'm living in this huge mansion and I've got all these beautiful things around me. I'm just doing it for the ummah. Be honest with yourself. And we said, having wealth is not haram. We're not talking about haram here. We're talking about whether a person, it's praiseworthy for them to chase extra to what they need. So we said that what the Sharia came with is asking Allah to give you enough to fulfill your needs. That's what the Sharia came with. That's the Allahumma kfina bihalalika an haramik wa aghnina bifadlika amman siwak. You don't have debt. You don't have a worry. Nobody, you don't fear that you're going to fall into the haram. You have enough for what you need. That's what the Sharia came with. And the Sharia didn't make it haram to have more than that. Someone says, I'm a billionaire. So it's not haram. You give your zakah. It's not haram for you. There's nothing haram about that. But should you be chasing that dream? Should you be using up your time and your efforts to chase that dream and saying, I'm doing it for the ummah? I don't think that is valid. I don't think that's the right way of dealing with things. But if it happens to you and you're looking for permissible means to do business and some of your businesses do well, or you get a promotion at work and your job's going well, don't feel that that's a bad thing. If it happens to you, take it, use it for yourself, use it for your family, and use it for sadaqat. No problem, inshallah. So I think there is a nuanced opinion in this. Recap, as it relates to asking Allah for what is enough for you, then this is what the Sunnah came with. As for asking Allah for more than what is enough, I'm not sure that we can find the evidence for that. We need to look and see, can we find a hadith where the Prophet ﷺ taught us to ask Allah for more than we need? This requires some research. And we don't think a person should be chasing the dunya and wealth for the sake of justifying that by saying, I'm doing it for the Muslims. Allahumma, unless they are truthful to their speech and they genuinely are, all of their extra, that's what they're giving. Otherwise, a person should be honest and say that everyone wants to live a comfortable life with luxury around them, and whatever extra they have, they give it, they pay their zakah, they give their sadaqah. There's no harm in that, and it's not haram, inshallah ta'ala. So what does it mean to be detached from this world then? Being detached from this world, the best that is said about it is only taking from this world what you need in order to serve the needs of you in your religion. That is perhaps one of the better things that is said about keeping away from this world. That's what it means. It doesn't relate to how much money you have. You can be zahid, you can be a person of zuhd, and you can have millions of pounds. And you can be a poor person who is living hand to mouth, and you can be from the most stingy of the people. Because ultimately, it's not how much money you have in your bank, but it's how much your heart is attached to that money. And money can be a fitna, it can be a test. إِنَّمَا أَمْوَالُكُمْ وَأَوْلَادُكُمْ fitna. Your wealth and your children are a trial and a test for you. They're a test as to whether you're going to do good, whether you're going to please Allah or not. They're a test. So here, be careful that you don't wish for something that's bad for you. A person says, I wish I could have this much money, this much money, this much money. But maybe that actually isn't helping them. So ultimately, it's not haram to have that, as long as a person is giving their zakah. But here now the question comes, should we be contributing as Muslims to advancements like engineering and so on? There is no harm in this. There's no harm in this. Muslims contributing this. But again, your concern should be the akhirah. Your worry should be the akhirah. Your worry should not be whether we're making this medical breakthrough or whether we're making this engineering breakthrough. Your concern should be the akhirah. And alhamdulillah, Allah has made us all different and has made us all excel in different things. So not everybody excels in the Islamic sciences. Some people excel in engineering. Some people excel in things like art and poetry. Some people excel in different fields. Some people excel in engineering and sciences. Some people excel in different things. There's no harm in that. But let every one of them be a practicing Muslim whose concern is the akhirah. And inshallah, if they do that, Allah will make it possible for them to contribute to their science in a way that is beneficial, but doesn't take them away from the greater goal of the akhirah. Now, so that is, I hope, a reasonably summarized, but relatively, sort of balanced answer as it relates to that. So I think we reached the point where more or less I'm going through the answers, I'm going through the questions one by one. So a lot of questions came about prayer times. Over the last few days, I've had different questions being asked about prayer times and about Fajr time and timetables where the Fajr time changes suddenly and all kinds of things like that. It's a little bit difficult to give a one-size-fits-all answer because every country has its own different situation and every city and so on. But what I would say is for people to be aware that prayer timetables are not guaranteed to be right. Prayer timetables are not guaranteed to be right. That's not, in Islam, the Prophet ﷺ did not come to us with a prayer timetable. He came to us with a specific definition of when Fajr is, when Dhuhr is, when Asr is, when Maghrib is, and when Isha is. That's what he came with. And the scholars expanded upon issues where it's not clear, like what happens when you can't tell the difference between Isha and Fajr, like in the summer in the UK, in the north. It can be difficult to tell the difference between the end of Isha and the coming of Fajr because the redness never really disappears from the sky in some places and so on. And these are issues that have been well researched. But I want people to understand that your prayer timetable is not from Allah Azza wa Jal. It's not revelation. Your prayer timetable is just a human being's effort to approximate the descriptions given by the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam for the prayer times. And we dealt with this in the class Bulugh al-Maram. It's on the Kalima UAE YouTube channel. You can go to YouTube, type in Kalima, K-A-L-E-M-A-H, UAE. And if you look for a playlist called Bulugh al-Maram, on there is a section on the timings of the prayer where we discuss the hadith which tell the times of the prayer. When does the prayer start? When does the prayer end? And so on. And then you understand the prayer timetable is an approximation. One of the really nice things that was done in Newcastle Central Mosque, which we did here on the Facebook page, that's what we're broadcasting from, the masjid, they made an effort to check their prayer timetable against the naked eye. So what they did is they took a brother who was an expert in the prayer times. He knew the different hadith and he took the prayer timetables and he went out to the East Coast and he went out also towards the West Coast. Alhamdulillah, where we are in Newcastle, there's not that big of a gap between the two sides. And they observed the Fajr and the Isha and they observed the prayer timetables. And they found a particular system within those prayer timetables that worked for them. And they said was closest to the naked eye. It was just a minute or two or so. I don't remember the exact details. It was a minute or two difference. So it was very accurate. They were happy with that. And they applied it to their prayer timetable. So subhanAllah, and it's not always possible in every country, in every place, but I think that it doesn't hurt. Go to the classes, Bulugh al-Maram, study the hadith, and then go out and observe these things. And I'm not saying that you change your prayer timetable for your entire city or something like that, or tell them it's wrong, but at least you could advise, you could come and say, I think that the best system, because there are many different systems of calculation, of different degrees for the sun angle at Fajr, of different calculations of the gap between Maghrib and Isha, different calculations of the gap between Isha and Fajr. All of these mathematical calculations are just approximate models to cover the hadith. They're just someone's attempt to cover the hadith. And the hadith is very simple. The hadith is nothing mathematical about it. You go, you stand when it's dark, when you see the light go lengthways along the horizon, it's Fajr time. It's not like you don't have to be a mathematician or a genius in the movement of the sun and the moon and the stars to understand it. All you have to do is just go out and look on a clean day when you can see the horizon. Get up before Fajr, you'll see the light stretch wide widthways along the coast, like along the horizon. And when you see that, that is Fajr. And so you check your prayer timetables and you check some different versions. You can use the American calculation or some of the UK have a calculation, or Al-Qura calculation, or the Egyptian calculation, and you You see which one do you think matches the time in the most accurate way. We'll just make a note of the time and come back and then you can compare it, inshallah. So what you might find is that one of the times appears to you to be more correct. Of course, it does require some expertise because there is a false fajr. There's a fake fajr and a true one. And you might go and look at the fake one and then think that it's the real one. So you have to be a bit careful. And also, there are some people have misconceptions, like they believe that fajr, it should be light. But the ahadith indicate that fajr should be dark, not light. Fajr, it should be so dark that you can't see the person next to you who's praying. That's one of the descriptions of fajr. So, once you remove these misconceptions, you go out and you look at it yourself. SubhanAllah, you might find that you settle on a particular prayer timetable. I think the masjid in Newcastle, they pretty much kept one system. I don't remember which one it was, whether it was Muslim World League or whatever, but they kept it and they made one adjustment to the number of degrees for Fajr. They adjusted it slightly to make it more in line with what they had observed, and then they published the timetable. And alhamdulillah, so I think this is my answer to this. But I would be wary definitely of the timetables that have the sudden jump like that. Like, for example, it's 1:45 a.m. and then it's 4 o'clock a.m. in one day. And they say this is because we couldn't see Fajr on that day, so we started following Morocco or something like that. I don't personally think that that's a very strong opinion. And I think better than that is for the person to follow the opinion that if there's a time in the summer that you can't see Fajr, then you keep the Fajr time as the last day that you could see Fajr. I give an example. Let's just say right now, Fajr is, what time's Fajr right now in Newcastle? 3:08 or something like that, 3:09 times 3, something like that. Let's say 3:10. And we can still see the Fajr here. We can still, with our own eyes, we can see Fajr. It's not like Isha doesn't go and, Isha is still there when Fajr comes. We can see Fajr. Okay. Goes to 3:08, 3:07, 3:06, 3:05. Still, we can see Fajr. Let's just say it gets to 2:45 and that's it. We can no longer, because of the light in the sky in the summer, we can no longer see the Fajr time. That's it. We can't see Fajr anymore. Can't see the Fajr time anymore. You can no longer see the difference between the ending of Isha and the coming of Fajr. Can't tell. So keep the last time. That might have been, example, 2:45. Keep that 2:45. Keep it all the way until you can see the Fajr again. That's a good opinion. That's a strong opinion. And you can follow your local masjid, inshallah. There's no harm in that. But you should advise them to have a consistent, reliable prayer timetable. It's sad if you've got a whole masjid and no one is able to check prayer times. That makes me sad. I don't think every Muslim should be able to do it or should have to do it, that every one of you in your house has to go out and check the prayer times. But if you have a whole masjid and nobody in that masjid is able to go and actually check the prayer times with their own eyes, I think that is not ideal. Not ideal. And maybe people in unique situations, a country where it's very difficult to see because of the cloud, there's always clouds and things like that. And so on. It could be different situations. But, I advise your masajid to check their timetables against the naked eye and not just to print out a timetable because that's the one they use in Makkah and it must be right. Like, that's not a reliable way of going about checking things. And the one in Makkah works because it's made in Makkah and tested in Makkah and used in Makkah. But it may not necessarily work to use that same timetable method, that same calculation may not work when it's applied to Newcastle, for example, and so on. So this is my advice with regard to the prayer timetables. Let's go through that. Are you allowed to read non-Islamic books in Ramadan? So there are two parts to this question. The first is, if this non-Islamic book is haram, then it's not allowed to read it inside of Ramadan or outside of Ramadan. If it's haram, if it contains haram in it. And This could be, like it could be something that it stirs up desires, or it encourages people to do haram, or it contains elements like sihr, like magic and the worship of the shayateen, and a person becomes attracted to it. And like we see, like the Harry Potter books, like look at how many millions of copies they've sold, and how many people are so attached to reading them, and they want to read all of them and the series and the offshoots and everything. And ultimately it softens their heart towards the shaitan and towards magic and things like that. And that's different from just reading, for example, about it in a book, even in a novel, where there's no attraction, there's nothing makes you want to go and do that. But even you might read in a novel about a haram kind of relationship, and then a person might get in their head that I want to go and commit that kind of relationship, or they start thinking about it. For these things are haram outright. They're haram in Ramadan and they're haram outside of Ramadan. But if they don't include those things, if the book is, the scholars differed over novels. Some of them said that novels are a kind of lying, and some of them said that if it's clear that it's a novel, if it's clear that it's a story, and the author is not presenting it as being truthful, then some of them said that is acceptable if it doesn't contain, those elements of haram in it that encourage people to fall into the haram. So the next issue is wasting time. No doubt Ramadan is not a time to waste. So for example, my kids, they love reading, but we've limited their reading time during Ramadan in terms of non-Islamic stuff, like as in stuff that isn't related to Islam, because it's wasting time ultimately. And like, it's okay when you want to take a break from time to time and read something different. You can't be necessarily reading let's say, for example, reading the Quran all the time in the day and the night. If Allah blesses you to do that, alhamdulillah. But if you want a break, you want to just read through the news headlines or something like that, there's no harm in that, but don't let it take over your time. Don't let it become something that takes your time. And this is something that me personally, I'm very careful, or I'm very careful. I'm trying to be more careful about this, that I have a habit of reading news headlines. And I don't I have the pictures switched off and everything like that, but I just like to flick through what's going on in the world today. But if that happens too much, it becomes a waste of time. So I try to now ration myself, let it just be, very less, even if once in a few days. It doesn't have to be even every day, just a minimal amount, and not something that becomes a habit. So that's my answer on the topic of non-Islamic material during the month of Ramadan. Very, very good question. Does the Quran always have to be kept on a high shelf or table? So there are two parts to this question. The first part to this question is the ruling of placing the Quran on the floor. Sheikh bin Baz, rahimahullah ta'ala, he was asked about placing the Quran on the floor, and he said it's not haram to place it on the floor. However, it's better to avoid it. It's better to avoid it. And that is because a person might understand what they might understand from that, what they might take from that, is they might take from that you are disgracing the Quran, or you don't care about the Quran, or you don't think that it's important to respect the Quran. So this could be a big problem. So generally speaking, I would say try to avoid putting the Quran on the floor. It's not haram to put it on the floor. Like, for example, if you are reading the Quran and you just put it on the floor, or if you come to sajda tilawa, a sajda place, and you put the Quran on the floor, and you put the mushaf on the floor, then you make sajda. This is not haram, but if you can avoid it, it's better. As for placing things on top of the mushaf, like putting the Quran and putting magazines on top, or putting books on top, then this is not befitting for a person to do. A person should always have the Quran have the most important status in your eyes. And that means that you shouldn't be putting the Quran on the bottom and stacking all the books on top. Rather, the Quran should have the main place in your, in terms of respect and honor. And I don't think it's haram for you to have the Quran on the middle shelf instead of the top shelf. But If a person puts the Quran on the top shelf out of a love of the Quran, a respect for it, then I think this is not a blame. This is not, you shouldn't blame the person for that. Ultimately, respecting the Mus'haf is a part of Islam. There's nothing wrong with putting books on the floor if you have to, but respecting the Mus'haf is a part of Islam. So we don't want to, I always tell my kids off if I see they put the Mus'haf down and they put paper on top of it, or they put other books on top of it, give the Mus'haf its respect and keep it, but I don't think that means it has to be the highest book in the whole house and you're not allowed to ever have another book that's higher on the shelf, but show it respect, give it the main place and give it the respect that it deserves, and don't put things on top of it. We answered that one. Okay. I've recently started working for the NHS and would like to know if it's permissible to take out a pension, and what is the Islamic viewpoint on setting money aside for retirement. So this is a very good question, and there are parts of this question that might be too comprehensive to be able to answer in this particular sitting today. I might not be able to answer all of the questions, this part of the question today, because pensions are quite complicated. There are two aspects to pensions that we might have concerns about. One concern we might have about pensions is the aspect of gambling. And that is when the pension offers to pay, for example, when you die, the entire pension is paid out, even if you haven't given that amount of money. Or if you can't work, then you receive a large amount of money from them. This is a kind of gambling. So let's exclude that. And let's talk about the pension, which you're just basically, they're investing the money that you and your employer put in, that is being invested, and then you receive what you have invested. You receive what you have invested. That's it. You don't receive extra sums or like gambling like that, like in insurance, you don't receive, but you just receive what you have invested. So here, if you receive what you have invested, then the issue here is making sure that the investment is done in accordance with Islamic principles. It's not being invested in interest. It's not being invested in haram. So in this way, it would be better for a person to, if they want to put money aside, maybe to put it aside into their own pension pot, which is invested in an Islamic way. That would be better. If they're able to direct their employer to invest it in an Islamic way, then alhamdulillah, this is excellent. So now the question comes, okay, what about if that's not possible? So there are two types of pension, compulsory and voluntary. If it's not possible because there's gambling in it, or they're not investing it in a halal way, like they're investing it in alcohol and gambling and things like that, then either it's obligatory or either it's voluntary. If it is obligatory, mandatory, you can't get out of it, then you can take back what you gave. In other words, when the pension pot comes, take what you gave and give the rest in charity, or give the haram element that is haram from it in charity. If it's the case that it's voluntary, then I don't advise you to enter into a voluntary pension that has elements of haram in it. And as we said, the major concern in the elements of haram would be, number one, the things that represent gambling, like getting back more than you put in. And we're not talking about investment and your investment grows, but like they're offering you that if you die, we'll give you, we'll give half of your monthly wage to your kids for the next 5 years or something. That again is not permissible, and the kids should only take what you actually gave. They shouldn't take any more than what you actually gave. You can take back what you gave, but nothing more than that. And also how it's invested. Is it invested in that which is halal? But as for saving money and putting money aside for retirement, I don't see any harm in that. I don't think there's anything Islamic that would say that that's wrong to do. Rather, it can be, again, from the means of protecting yourself from debt, protecting yourself from begging, protecting yourself from haram, by having enough to suffice you and putting some money aside. And from the evidence for this is the concept of zakah. Zakah is paid upon money that you have set aside in savings, right? That's what zakah is paid upon. So therefore, it is permissible generally to set money aside like that. But perhaps I would advise, if someone wants to do that, let them put it aside into something which is permissible, something which is, inshallah ta'ala, gonna be permissible for them in terms of the way that it's managed and the terms and conditions that come along with it. That's a bit of a brief answer for a pretty complicated question, but there is one more aspect. Some of the scholars mentioned, they said that if your pension provider is the government, like the one who is giving you these things is the government, then you can be more relaxed about the government giving you more money than you deserve. In other words, if the government give you more money than you deserve, this is not necessarily haram, because the government is obliged to spend upon the welfare of its citizens. Does that make sense? I hope that makes sense. So that would be an issue where we say that somebody has a pension which is a government pension. For example, they might be a teacher, or they might be, I'm not sure about the NHS, whether that's done through the government or whether that's a private pension, but the government has the right to spend more upon you than you deserve, because that's part of what the government looking after the citizens. So the scholars, they said it's not so bad when it's a government pension. But still, generally, hopefully my answer made sense. Okay, the next question, where are we up to? 95. The next question, this is a very important question, and I really appreciated this question. Is vigilantism permissible in Islam? I always thought that it wasn't. However, I recently came across an article on Islam QA which went through various ahadith, like when Ibn Maktoum radiallahu an killed his female slave because she insulted the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So first of all, we say that there is broad consensus among the scholars that the hudud are only to be carried out by the government or the one who is appointed by the government. And by the government, we mean the Amir, because in Islam, we don't really have a concept of a government with collective authority. We have a concept of one person that has authority and then appoints people to delegate that authority. So we have an Amir. The Amir might have a minister of education and a minister, but they all take their authority from the Amir. Ultimately, the Amir is the one who has the authority, right? So in Islam, we don't really have the concept of a collective authority whereby the government as a collective group of people has responsibility. But in the day and age that we live in now, many countries, that's what we have. So whether it's an individual ruler or whether it's a government, at the end of the day, it is the ruler and the government that have the authority to carry out punishments. And this is a matter of consensus, broadly speaking. From this, there are many, I have many quotes for you in this. Al-Imam al-Nawawi, rahimahullah ta'ala, he said in his Majmu', he said, as for the laws and the rulings, then whenever it becomes obligatory to carry out the punishment for zina or stealing or drinking alcohol, it is not permissible for anyone to carry that out without the permission of the Imam or without the permission of the one that the Imam has, Imam here being the ruler of the Muslims, has delegated this responsibility to. So that's like the Minister of Justice or the judge in the court, or they've all got delegated authority from the Imam. And he said, because the punishments in the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and in the time of the Khulafa al-Rashideen, they were only carried out with their permission. and seeking that permission and getting it from the Imam. And then he mentioned some narrations in this, the statement of the people of Medina: it's not right for anyone to carry out anything from the hudud without the sultan, without the permission of the ruler. But now we come to a problem, which is that we find individual ahadith in certain situations which indicate that sometimes there were instances where some of the Sahaba carried out certain punishments without permission of the ruler, or without going back to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah ta'ala, he answers this in his amazing book, As-Sarim al-Maslul. And this, I believe, has been translated into English, if I'm not mistaken. Let me see. Ibn Taymiyyah. Let's see. The unsheathed sword against the one who insults the messenger. Sallallahu alayhi wasallam. Shaykh Islam Taymiyyah has a book on this, the unsheathed sword against the one who insults the messenger sallallahu alayhi wasallam. And in this he dealt with this, and he said, rahimahullah ta'ala, he said يبقى أن يقال الحدود لا يقيمها إلا الإمام أو نائبه، or إلا الإمام أو نائبه، إلا الإمام ونائبه. That's better. He said, there remains an issue that punishments are only carried out by the ruler or his representative. So he said, وَجَوَابُهُ مِنْ وُجُوهٍ. There are a number of ways to answer this in relation to what Ibn Maktoum did, rahimahullah ta'ala. He said, and the first one he said is that it's allowed for the owner of a slave to carry out the punishment on the slave. So he said here the example of the example that was mentioned is an example where the owner of the slave carried out the punishment upon the slave. He said one way we can answer this is to say it's not allowed to carry out punishments. However, it's allowed for a slave owner to carry out a punishment upon a slave. And he brought some ahadith in this regard. He brought a hadith in which the Prophet ﷺ said, أَقِيمُوا الْحُدُودَ عَلَى مَا مَلَكَتْ أَيْمَانُكُمْ. Carry out punishments against those who your right hands possess. The hadith narrated by Ahmed and Al-Arnaut, Shu'aib Al-Arnaut, he said it is Hasan. And Shaykh Al-Albani, rahimahullah ta'ala, he said it's from the statement of Ali bin Abi Talib, radiyallahu anh. However, there are other ahadith in this regard, from the Prophet ﷺ, that are authentic, that indicate, and Shaykh Islam, he said, I don't know any difference among the scholars of fiqh or the scholars of hadith that it is allowed for a slave owner to carry out a punishment against the slave, like zina or accusations or drinking, false accusations or drinking alcohol. And he said, he said, وَلَا خِلَافْ بَيْنَ الْمُسْلِمِينَ أَنَّ لَهُ تعزير or أن له he said that there is no difference of opinion among the Muslims that it is allowed for this person to carry out these punishments. However, he said they differed about it if it is killing or the cutting of a limb. If it's killing or the cutting of a limb, is it allowed for the slave owner to carry out that punishment? And Imam Ahmed has two opinions. One that it's allowed, and that's the opinion of a Shafi'i, and the other one that it's not allowed, and that is another opinion from the companions of a Shafi'i, and it's the opinion of Malik. And he said it's authentically reported from Ibn Umar that he cut the hand of a slave of his who stole, and so on. And it's narrated from Hafsa that she killed a slave girl of hers who admitted to carrying out magic. So he said that it's like Shaykh Islam Taymiyyah, he's going towards the issue here, that this was the issue of the slave. And this is a matter the scholars differed over. I don't want to get too much into this issue into more detail because you can read the book, The Unsheathed Sword. But I would like to say this, that there is a further consideration in our time today. And that is that the laws prevent, even if we said that there is a subset of this that was allowed, the laws prevent it. And the mafsada in it, the harm in it is huge. I.e. the harm in Muslims carrying out these things by themselves, like vigilantism. It's huge. Even in the issue of insulting the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Even in this matter of insulting the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that it becomes a huge issue. People killing people and saying he insulted the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, so I killed him. And the harm in this is great. It's not like the time of the Sahaba where there was a degree of trust. And even those scholars who said, some of the scholars, they said, and Ibn Taymiyyah mentioned this, he said that that some of the scholars, they said that the one who insults the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, yuhdaru damu, that person, the bounty is on their head for them to be killed wherever they are on the earth. Yani that is the opinion of some of the scholars. Yani it's not, this is a matter you can't hide from it. Yani that is the opinion of a number of scholars, that the one who insults the Prophet ﷺ, the bounty is on their head wherever they are, and there is no safety for them in any corner of the earth. That is one opinion. However, if you apply this today, the harm that is going to come upon the Muslims is greater than the harm that you're seeking to offset. And that's why Ibn Taymiyyah, he mentioned that these things, when the Muslims are in a position of strength, are different from when the Muslims are in a position of weakness. When the Muslims are in a position of weakness and someone goes around and says that, oh, this person insulted the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, so I've taken it upon myself to kill them, that this is causing 1,000,000 times more problems than it's solving. Even if it was the opinion of some of the scholars in some situations. So even if someone reads and says, well, I read that Ibn Taymiyyah said this, or I read that this Imam Ahmed said this, or I read that so-and-so said this, then you have to still ask yourself, are you, by harming or by cutting off this evil, are you bringing about an evil that is worse? Because there is an agreement among the Muslims that it's not permissible for you to stop an evil if that evil leads to a greater evil. And let me give you an example of that. We've heard Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah, and he had a very strict opinion about this. Ibn Taymiyyah himself passed by a group of the Tatar drinking alcohol. He passed by a group of the Tatar, the Mongols, who were killing the Muslims, and they were drinking alcohol. So the students of Ibn Taymiyyah, they said, let us go and take this alcohol from them. Any alcohol is a matter of the had, yani it's a matter of, there is a punishment for this in Islam. So they said, let us go and deal with it. Ibn Taymiyyah, he said, leave them, because this is the only thing that is stopping them from killing the Muslims. So you see that you can't just take this thing that says that some of the scholars said that it's allowed if it's insulting the Prophet ﷺ, for example, that this is an exception. In this case, vigilantism is allowed. The problem is that the harm being created is more than is causing more problem than the issue that you're trying to solve. It's not stopping people insulting the Prophet ﷺ. In fact, it's causing even more people, like when we saw these attacks that happened against that magazine in France, and what happened with the cartoons in Denmark and so on. What we see is that this only inspires them to do it even more. And it causes a backlash against the Muslims, which might cause the masajid to be closed, the Muslims to be arrested and harmed. And it's not stopping the problem in the first place. So we don't see that in this day and age, in the non-Muslim countries under their authority, that it is praiseworthy for a person to take these matters into their own hands, even if there are some of the scholars who allowed that in some limited situations. And generally speaking, I think that if you look at the ahadith, it's difficult to argue that there's a general license for that. And generally, we should go back to the basic principle that punishments are carried out by the government. That should be our basic principle, and Allah Azza wa Jalla knows best. Okay, still going on through the questions that were submitted. And in just about 5 minutes, I'll have a look at the questions that you've posted in the chat, and I'll try and answer some of them as well. Interesting question. How do we go about moving or migrating to Dubai? I love Dubai. Wallah, I love living there. I'm living in Newcastle right now. But I really enjoyed living in the UAE, and I found it to be a place where you can really practice Islam, and you can avoid, alhamdulillah, many of the things that the negative things people hear are in specific places and specific times. And it's easy for a person to avoid them. And there's a lot of good. There's a lot of good there. And alhamdulillah, it's easy to go to the masajid, and it's a very comfortable place to live. And there's a lot of support for Islam and the Muslims there. But in terms of giving advice about moving to different countries, I think that's unique to each individual person. And I would just advise a few simple things. First of all, I would advise you go there and see the real life there as a person living there before you move your family. And what I mean by that is, even Saudi Arabia, what a lot of people I found them do is they go for Umrah, and then the next thing they do is bring their family to live there. Umrah is not a representative, it's not a representation of what really life is like there every day. So if you're going to go for Umrah, no problem, but, experience real life there. If you're going to go, someone says, I went to Dubai, it was the worst place I ever went to, so much haram and whatever. But, you got a hotel on Sheikh Zayed Road and you stayed there. What you did is you stayed right in the middle of the fitna and the fasad. You stayed right in the middle of the worst place you can stay, and you never ventured out of it. If you want to be honest about what it's like, go and stay. If you can't maybe you can't find a hotel, but, go and actually experience life outside of that little bubble. And the same is for Saudi, and same for Saudi Arabia. Like you might love life next to the Prophet's Masjid, and I'm in a 5-star hotel and it's amazing, but actually have you experienced what it's like to live there every day? You have to be a bit more, you have to go and find out and go and experience it. And if you do that, and inshallah, there's no harm in moving over, inshallah, and it's a good thing to move to a Muslim country. It's good to look at the pros and cons. Nowhere is perfect. Nowhere is perfect. And there are pros and cons in everything. And you've got to decide if those pros and cons are suitable for you. So one person, says that, why don't you move to Saudi? Like I've said, people say to me, why do you live in Dubai? Why don't you go to Saudi? The thing is that everybody has to look at the situation in their own needs and their own circumstances, and what works for them and what doesn't work for them, and some of the difficulties and the benefits, and balance them in a way that is good for you, inshallah. And also, it's very important to note about the Middle East that it's very difficult to move to the Middle East unless you have employment, because generally speaking, the Middle East is very welcoming if you have, the financial resources, but they're not very welcoming. They don't like to have a drain on their economy by bringing people that are not benefiting in terms of that. So you have to think about what kind of a job you could get, and you have to experiment and go and look for things instead of going there without any sort of idea, because it can be difficult. And it's not cheap to live there either. None of the countries in the Middle East are particularly cheap to live in. So you've got to kind of bear those things in mind, inshallah. Okay. So a very beautiful question here about becoming a student of knowledge and asking about a madrasa online, and the teacher saying that I'm teaching 300 students, but maybe feeling like the knowledge is not up to it. First of all, we would say, don't stop teaching your students. Even if your knowledge is not up to it, don't stop teaching your students, but make an effort to make sure everything you teach is reliable. Wallahi, we feel the same that you feel. I feel the same. So many times I feel like, subhanAllah, like I'm teaching this. Do I really know it? But what I do is I go back to the scholars. And I listen to their lessons, and I try to just convey what I've heard from them. Sometimes, yeah, of course, you add things from your own knowledge, your own experience, but generally you try your best. to base it upon what you've heard from your teachers and to convey it like that. As for online madrasa or online studying of Islam, I'm going to post for you guys in the comments if I can. I mentioned it a few times. Let's go to this website, amauathome.com. I know at the moment the courses are very small. The courses are very small, and it's not like the full madrasa yet. But inshallah, we're working towards it. And inshallah ta'ala, within a short time, in a few months, there will be a full online Islamic learning experience, which goes through classical books and isn't like, the existing ones that, alhamdulillah, some great stuff online right now, but we're talking about something that goes through classical books and goes in detail and really pushes you to reach a level of knowledge that you didn't think it was possible for you to reach. So I think this is, inshallah, something to keep a close eye on, inshallah ta'ala. But I would say again to that person that I don't recommend for you that you stop teaching your students, because that's not going to help your students either. Maybe the one who comes after you will be worse. So I recommend keep teaching. But what I recommend for you to do, inshallah, is for you to just make really sure that what you're teaching is accurate. If you get asked a question you don't know, just say, I don't know. And try to always check that you're taking your lessons and your lectures from reliable sources. Next question. With regard to grandparents looking after the child, for example, if the elderly grandparents play music in the car and they don't respect the parents' wishes, can the parents restrict access to the child? I think in a way that is ma'roof. وَصَاحِبْهُمَا فِي الدُّنْيَا مَعْرُوفًا. Accompany them in a way that's ma'roof. So in a way that doesn't cause the family to break up. Like, I don't think you can say to them, you can never see my child again, or I don't want you near my child. But you can say to them that, look, if you're not going to stick to the rules on this and you are going to play music, then I'm not going to send them to go with you in the car. I'm not going to let them go with you in the car then. We're not going to say to them, never going to see you again or cut off from them. But yeah, you can restrict your children's access to that, because it's haram at the end of the day, and there is no obedience to creation in disobedience to the Creator. But as Allah Azza wa Jalla said, وَصَاحِبْهُمَا فِي الدُّنْيَا مَعْرُوفًا. Be along with them in the dunya in the best way. So don't, if it's your parents or husband's parents or wife's parents, you can't cut off from them or be rude to them or be, evil towards them. But in the best way, in the kindest way, you can still restrict your children. Maybe don't let them stay over, or don't let them go in the car with them while they continue to expose those kids to the haram. The next question, the hospital prayer room is open for prayers. I find myself in the presence of a few others. Can we do jama'ah with a large gap between us? Yes, you can. I checked the fatwa on this issue, and there is a reasonable fatwa that if this is the reliable medical advice, then inshallah ta'ala it doesn't invalidate the prayer, and there is no fiqhi opinion that it invalidates the prayer. So it is khilaf al-awla. It's not what should be done to stand 3 meters apart or 2 meters apart. That's not what is the sunnah. But if that is what is required to comply with the rules and the regulations, then it doesn't invalidate the prayer. It doesn't make the prayer invalid. And it's better to go and pray like that than it is not to go and pray in the hospital prayer room at all. So better you go there and you pray with those gaps, inshallah, if that is the best that you can do. فَاتَّقُوا اللَّهَ مَا اسْتَطَعْتُمْ. Fear Allah as much as you are able. If I find myself alone in the hospital prayer room, is there a reward for calling the adhan? There is 24 access, but no time for the 5, or no specific time for the 5 daily prayers. Uqba ibn Amir narrated, and the hadith, it's a hadith which is hadith sahih, it's authentic hadith from Uqba ibn Amir. It's narrated in Sunan Nasa'i and others. The Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said, sallallahu alayhi wasallam, he said, يعجب ربك من راعي غنم في رأس شرذية الجبل يؤذن بالصلاة ويصلي فيقول الله عز وجل انظروا إلى عبدي هذا يؤذن ويقيم الصلاة يخاف مني قد غفرت لعبدي وأدخلته الجنة. أو كما قال صلى الله عليه وسلم. He said that your Lord is pleased with the shepherd on the top of a mountain who gives the adhan for the prayer and he prays, and Allah Azza wa Jal says, look at my slave. He gives the adhan and he establishes the prayer and he fears me. I have forgiven this slave of mine and I have entered him into paradise. So this is an evidence for the virtue of giving the adhan, even if you're by yourself. Even if you're by yourself, you can still give the adhan, inshallah, even if you are on your own and by yourself. If the prayer time comes, the time for the adhan comes, go and give the adhan, inshallah, even if you're by yourself. There's a great reward in that, inshallah ta'ala. This is probably, let's see, is this the last question? Yeah, so two more questions I'm going to take as the last question. I had 126 in total, so I've got up to 105. So inshallah ta'ala, I did my best. And next week we'll continue from where we left off, inshallah. So don't worry, if your question is there, we try our best to answer, inshallah. My grandmother gifted me a bunch of items she didn't want and has allowed me to sell them, but some of them contain porcelain statues of animals. Do I give these back to her or throw them out? And so on. First of all, that if she gifted them to you, then they are yours, and therefore you can dispose of them, inshallah. You shouldn't give them back to her, because you're giving back to her something that's haram. Even if she's not a Muslim, you still shouldn't give back to her like that. And likewise, you can't sell them, because you can't sell what is haram. So you should break them, generally speaking. If it's possible to remove the head and keep the body, then maybe you could find some use for it. But generally speaking, no. If they've been gifted to you, they're your property. So you should break them and get rid of them, inshallah. Is it permissible to sell a white wedding dress that non-Muslims wear? I don't believe that this is permissible. No, because this is from the things this is from their things, yani. Like, especially if you're talking about selling it to Muslims. This is from the things that they wear. And I mean, their weddings are acceptable in the sight of Allah. What I mean by that is, if someone gets married as a Christian, their marriage is considered to be valid, or any other religion. Yani, like, they get married, their marriage is considered to be a marriage in Islam. And it's not like we say to them, you're not married, you have to do a nikah again. Their marriage is considered to be correct, yani, valid. But the dresses they wear, and the likelihood they don't wear them, and they don't cover properly. And as for giving it to the Muslims, the Prophet ﷺ said, وَمَنْ تَشَبَّهَ بِقَوْمٍ فَهُوَ مِنْهُمْ. Whoever resembles a people is one of them. So I don't think we should be selling those things. And sometimes the Muslims have a habit of copying the non-Muslims in some things, like the wedding dresses. Like, you see a lot of Muslims in India, they copy the Hindus in their wedding practices. And a lot of Muslims in, for example, Sham, in Syria and Palestine and those places, they copy the Christians in their weddings. This is not befitting, not befitting for a Muslim to do. Rather, the Muslim should be distinct and different from the non-Muslims. So that takes us up to question number 106. So I'm going to stop there. 20 more to go in this batch. And then if you have some more for me next week, inshallah ta'ala, we do our very best. Let me have a look at any questions that came on the side here, because there could be some questions that came on the side. Let me see. Let's see if there are some questions on the side that are important. Okay, how do I put a question in? That's a very good question. Let me post you the question link. Let me post you the link for the question. I think that's it. I'm going to pin it. That's the link for the question there. How to post it. It's like a form that you can fill in, and it should take you to where you can type the question in, inshallah. Okay. So the next question on the side said, you want to give something daily, but the situation we're in, it doesn't allow it. So if you're in a situation where you're prevented from an ibadah because of the current situation, COVID-19 or whatever, you're prevented from an act of worship, then you should look for an alternative. If you can't give physically every day to somebody because of restrictions, maybe you can give online every day. I have a list of charities that I recommend on my website. I'll post that link. muhammadtim.com/charity, I think it is. I have a list of charities that I recommend, or I've had good experiences with, particularly crisis aid. I would highly recommend. So you maybe could give via that. If you're prevented from something at that time, then you look for an alternative. If you're prevented from going to the masjid, you establish the prayer in the house and you do your best with that to make a little jama'ah in the house. If you're prevented from something you used to do, like you used to go and visit sick people and you can't do that anymore, then look for alternative. Use Zoom and call them, like whatever. You've got to look for an alternative. If an ibadah is taken away from you, you have to look at what you can do to replace it in the best possible way. So a mother who has to pay maintenance towards a child that resides with the father, is this classed as zakah? No, I believe it's not. It's classed as infaq, as spending. Now, I mean, in the first place, in Islam, we don't really have a concept of a mother paying for maintenance towards her child. That is nothing to do with Islam, because in Islam, the responsibility is the father's responsibility. وَعَلَى الْمَوْلُودِ لَهُ رِزْقُهُنَّ وَكِسْوَتُهُنَّ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ. Yani, Allah Azza wa Jal told us that the father, it's the father's responsibility, not the responsibility of the mother. However, maybe the law maybe forces her to do that. In which case, if the law forces her to do that, she pays it, but it's not considered to be zakah. The most you can get out of it is niyat sadaqah. Yani make it niyah of sadaqah, but you can't make it zakah. So a question about the haram element to charity. Inna Allah tayyibun la yaqbalu illa tayyiba. Allah is tayyib and He only accepts that which is tayyib. I'm not quite sure exactly what the element to that question is like exactly. There's no doubt that there is, Allah only accepts that which is pure. I understood now. Maybe when I said about giving away the haram element to charity, and I said, does that not contradict? Yeah, I understood now. I said about that if you had from the pension and you were forced, they gave you money that wasn't yours, you give it to charity. Even the scholars say you give interest money that you couldn't avoid, like you had no choice but to take that money, and you couldn't avoid it, you give that money to charity. But someone says, what about the statement, Inna Allah tayyibun la yaqbalu illa tayyiba? That relates to your reward. You don't actually get rewarded for giving that riba money to charity. But as it relates to the people that receive it, it's not haram for them. And that's why the scholars, they say if you receive money like interest, and it wasn't your choice, you didn't choose it, you didn't even try it, it just came to you like that, then in this case, you give that money to charity. You're not rewarded you personally don't get the reward for that. But it's you don't burn your money, right? You give it to somebody, and for them it's a benefit, but for you it might not be. Now, I understood the question. Sorry, I fully understood the question. It was a good point. Doesn't it contradict to the statement, Inna Allah tayyibun la yaqbalu illa tayyiba? Allah only accepts that which is pure. But that doesn't exclude the permissibility of giving haram wealth away so that it's not wasted. But it's said that if it's haram wealth, you don't get rewarded for it in terms of the qabul from Allah for your deed as a good deed. But what happens is it just goes to benefit the poor people. Just in what the scholars, they call it, I think they call it a takhallus, and just get rid of it, get it out of your possession. But they don't consider it to be like a sadaqah or a beneficial action. But it's just getting it out of your possession. Now, It's a very valid point you made, and Allah Azza wa Jal knows best. That's what Allah made easy for me to mention. It's getting very close to the time for iftar here in Newcastle, so we're going to stop there. That's what Allah made easy for me to mention, and Allah Jalla fi Ula knows best. Wassalatu wassalam ala nabina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Inshallah ta'ala, we'll be on at the same time next week on a Sunday. It is around about 7 o'clock UK time, and inshallah the question list is there of how to post the questions in the comments. And Allah knows best. May Allah Azza wa Jal accept from us all our Ramadan, our fasting and our standing in Ramadan. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept it from us. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala teach us what benefits us and benefit us with what He teaches us and increases in knowledge. And Allah knows best. Wassalatu wassalam ala nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in.